Hello and welcome to the Ideas Factory. I'm Naghma. With me is Professor Pant. On this episode of the Ideas Factory, we're looking at some of the very important happenings around us. The first or the top of the mind is India-China. The India-China disengagement has been taking place in Eastern Ladakh, and now the 10th round of talks are taking place on regarding the disengagement on the other sectors. Other than that, the whole political statement, the din of the political statement, whether India bowed down to China or whether India pressured China to move back, we will try to look at what is the situation as far as India-China is concerned. Other than that, we will look at our neighbor Bhutan. Something unprecedented is happening in the Himalayan kingdom and the Quad ministerial meetings that has just taken place. In that context, we'll look at the Indo-Pacific. A very warm welcome, Harsh, and let's start with India-China. So put things in perspective for us. The disengagement is taking place. The 10th round of talks are going on, but on the eve of the talks, we've also seen some pictures that have come out, some videos, as well as China's admission that a few of its soldiers, admitting the casualty. But at the same time, the Russian agencies had also quoted some figure and which went up to 45, China admitting 4. So what do you think is the reason behind China's admission now? It's a big deal, isn't it? The China admitting whatever it is admitting to.
I think last 2 weeks have been certainly quite dramatic, both in terms of China acknowledging the fatalities, the casualties, and also China, starting this disengagement process in Eastern Ladakh, which has now come to a conclusion. And now we are looking at what perhaps are other friction areas along the LAC in the 10th round of the dialogue. So clearly, I think the costs were becoming unsustainable for China, and of course, India always wanted a disengagement. So you have two countries which initially were diverging, and therefore we saw months and months of stalemate and nothing, no forward movement. But suddenly now there is a spring in the air in some ways, and we are looking at a process perhaps that might lead to a broader stability along the LAC if the present trends continue. Now, the questions, I think, in some ways remain about the Sino-Indian relationship where they were post Galwan, and nothing much substantively has changed. But what seems to have changed is the Chinese appreciation of the calculus behind how far they are willing to sustain the costs that I think they were that India has been managed to impose, and the wider trend, I think, in sort of Chinese geopolitics. So, we have had a new administration in Washington, and we have had certain pressures on China from other fronts as well. So, what we are now looking at is a disengagement process in one particular area along the LAC that has come to a conclusion. And that's a very positive sign in some ways, given where we were just a few days back. So, I think that being resolved, now we will see what happens on other issues.
Mm-hmm.
Widely, I don't see much changing, but I think clearly this can be the beginning of a long drawn-out process, perhaps where a new equilibrium gets set between India and China.
All right. We are looking at that. The Pangong disengagement is over, and the spotlight is now on the hot springs, Gogra, Depsang, and we have to see how these talks go forward. But if I may bring you back to this rare admission by China and task the Russian agencies saying that the casualties were up to 45, China admitting 4 casualties, acknowledging 4 casualties. Do you think it's the pressure or that China is admitting this now? Do you think it's like a face saving? Because China, it's very rare for China to admit any casualty.
Very, very rare, and I don't recall last time they did it, even when they had a conflict with Vietnam, I think. In this particular case, given that they would have known that they would lose face after months and months of claiming that first nothing happened, then India was the culprit, then we did not lose any soldiers. So there has been a narrative building and narrative shifting, which has now come to an end. It is also very interesting. It was very interesting that they did not really officially contradict the TASS report,
Mm-hmm.
the Russian agency's report. And I think when when CNN or BBC do it, they can always brush aside fake news and say, but when Russian agencies do it, they have to tread very cautiously. I think
Absolutely.
that was one reason why perhaps they did not take on that report. But clearly, in this particular case, what they've done is they've partially admitted it, the number of casualties, given that CCP is never known for its transparency. I'm sure we will see more revelations coming down the line. But what they've now admitted is it's that they have, this report in Global Times was about decorations, about certain
Yes.
soldiers. I think 4 of them have been decorated by the Chinese Military Commission, and that's what the report was about. So in any case, they are not, what they are now trying to do is gradually release some information and gradually also shape the narrative in within China, because I think this is now becoming a burden for Xi Jinping within China. Questions are being raised when you have multiple agencies now talking about casualties. Certainly, given that he's a shrewd politician, he would know that eventually this will come back to haunt him. So now I think they are gradually setting the scene, setting the narrative, and this is what we will see over the next few months, that they will continue to release in bits and pieces information about this, about the casualties, and try to make a case that look, these were brave soldiers who died in the line of duty. So gradually, in some ways, acknowledging the casualties as well as what happened in Galvan, and certainly, of course, Indian soldiers were killed. India, the traditional approach but which India takes whenever Indian soldiers are killed, India took that position. But for China now to come to this conclusion that it is now perhaps time for it to reveal its cards, perhaps it's now time to reveal the challenges within, is a reflection of certain anxiety within the Chinese system, within the Chinese Communist Party, within Xi Jinping's perhaps core set of advisors, that this is becoming unsustainable. That in this day and age, howsoever hard they may try, they will not be able to conceal what happened on the border, what happened that day, and in particular about the Chinese deaths, because that is something that can haunt the not only Xi Jinping but the wider Communist Party if this carries on for longer period of time. So I think domestic pressures perhaps led Xi Jinping to acknowledge this, and international pressure led China to come to terms with India, because clearly the message from India was quite robust and quite consistent, that India will not back down, and India will not India ultimately would stand up to China on these matters. So clearly for China, both on domestic and global fronts, costs were rising, and I think they decided that they need to cut their losses and move forward.
Domestic compulsions as well as international pressure is what has led us here. And right now, when we're looking at this disengagement, there are a lot of political statements, of course, and India has its own domestic politics. And we have heard politicians saying that India actually bowed down to China. We've given in, we've given our land. But let's just look at what is the situation right now between India and China. The disengagement is taking place. The Pangong disengagement is over. The spotlight is shifting to many other important areas. So, of course, the challenges remain. And, what we've seen, China's behavior is very, very unpredictable. Also, you cannot rely on China. So, India has to be very cautious. India has to be very, very. How do you see the India-China relationship looking at the 9 months of tension and the build-up? And now the disengagement taking place, can we hope for things getting back to normal, if I may call that?
I don't see how we can go back to pre 2020 days of this relationship. I think the relationship has fundamentally changed.
Mm-hmm.
And if you see the statement that Defense Minister made in the Parliament, he first listed all the differences that continue to exist. He mentioned Aksai Chin, he mentioned Arunachal, he mentioned all the
Yeah.
problem areas, and then he came to this particular question of Eastern Ladakh, where disengagement processes started. So in some ways, government is now making it very clear that the relationship perhaps has been altered, and for good. So the challenge now is what can be done within those constraints. Clearly, China is our neighbor and we have to live with China. China has to live with India. But let us also be, I think, a bit honest here and say that, look, uh, India is standing up to China and making China acknowledge that the problem on the border is a big deal. This is a big deal, not only, I think, in terms of how India has approached the China question. This is now the second time after Doklam that India managed to stand up and challenge China and making it very clear to the Chinese that we are not backing down from our vital interests. This is a big deal, I think, in some ways for India's China policy, and this is also a big deal for Asian geopolitics, which I
Mhm.
think cannot be underestimated because this will reverberate in the Asian landscape. That you have as India is a weaker country in many respects when it comes to the quantitative and qualitative assessments of China's economic measures or even China's defense measures, defense resources. But despite that, what India made it very clear, and I think India has made it clear to China and to the rest of the world, that power disparity alone cannot dictate the outcomes.
Mhm.
You can stand up to a bully and you can stand up to an aggressive power like India did, and managed to convince the rest of the world that the India's narrative was right and that India's position was the correct one. So in that sense, I think the global bandwagoning uh, in favor of India has been a very important development. And of course, it happened in a certain context, in the context of COVID-19 and all the rest of it. But I think the message that has gone out from this is that China's behavior will be repulsed, China's behavior will be tackled, and China's behavior will not be tolerated just because China is a stronger power. So that I think is a message that will have important consequences both for Indian foreign policy as well as for Chinese role in the Asian geostrategic order.
Absolutely. China's behavior will be repulsed is a message that has been given out. And we've seen that even in the recent Quad ministerial meeting that has taken place, because the statements that have come out, clearly it shows that all the countries, all the members have China on its mind, because the Quad ministers have again stated that they want respect for territorial integrity. Along with that, this ministerial meeting was very significant, Harsh, because it was the first that was taking place after the new US administration in place. It was also the first time that India officially used the word Quad. China was clearly on the mind of all the countries, and we see that there is a message that has gone out for a stronger grouping, for an annual meeting of the group, to counter China in the area and to have a peaceful Indo-Pacific.
Yes, I think the message has gone out, and the message also I think has gone out from the Biden administration that there is going to be a lot of continuity, that they don't want to challenge the fundamentals of America's China policy as they have evolved over the last few years, even under Mr. Trump. So clearly there is a lot of continuity in that regard, and that expectation that some of the key issues on the table, they may be controversial, but they will be addressed, like the territorial issue. I mean, you can have different interpretation sitting in Canberra, sitting in Delhi, and sitting in Tokyo and Washington. But I think the underlying reality that this is an issue which is a very sensitive one for all countries, especially in Asia, India, Japan, and Australia, in different ways. Sovereignty is a big issue, and China trampling upon that sovereignty is a big issue. And you have now these four countries talking about that explicitly, making it very clear that they have no intention of backing down, that they have no intention of making Quad just a platform for soft issues. This is a platform that will discuss, debate, and coordinate actions on even hard security matters. I think the message, therefore, is very, very robust. And now that we also perhaps are moving towards the top level leadership meeting of Quad member states, there is an indication that this is going to be a very, very important platform in the Indo-Pacific landscape, where actually institutions are not that many, and robust institutions are required to tackle the changing balance of power in the region.
So that's a very clear message there, and a very robust message of all the member countries, and the member countries are very keen to meet annually. Before we end this discussion, I would like to draw your attention to one of our neighbors, a very peaceful neighbor. Something that has happened there is unprecedented. I'm talking about the Himalayan kingdom, Bhutan. What's happening there? The most senior Supreme Court judge and a top army officer coming together to stage a coup or to overturn the authority, and now they've been detained. So how do we see this, the developments in Bhutan?
Quite extraordinary and unprecedented. We have never heard or even speculated on such developments happening, given that the constitutional monarchy there seemed relatively well established, and the norms of conduct were relatively well established. I mean, you don't hear individuals because of their personal predilections or personal ambitions trampling upon those norms. But I think what is happening in Bhutan also, is a reflection that democracy is a work in progress in Bhutan. that that institutional maturity is a work in progress in Bhutan. We have, it was only in 2008 that we have seen the codification of the new constitution, and how that has, and I think its evolution is a work in progress, and therefore, it is becoming, in some ways, quote unquote, normal democracy, where you will find such things happening more often, because personal ambitions will now collide with the normative standards that Bhutan has set up for itself. Now, of course, India as a country, as a neighboring country, most important partner for India is Bhutan, and India would like greater stability. But I think India should be prepared for such more such developments, because ultimately, it's institutions that matter, and ultimately institutional maturity cannot come by external diktat. It will only come once internal mechanisms are mature enough to tackle such problems. And I think they have done it even in this case, where some senior functionaries were trying to pursue a certain policy action in a certain direction. Even in this case, we have found that so far, institutions in Bhutan have been able to prevent a large scale problem emerge from a large scale problem from emerging, and they've been able to manage it relatively peacefully, relatively in a relatively stable manner. But I think it is what is clear is that perhaps, again, to use a word that is being used quite often these days, perhaps this is the new normal for Bhutan as well. That as Bhutan grows into a democracy, into a more normal democracy, we will find that institutions will have to be built and rebuilt and reconfigured. And we will find that such things, such events, such episodes will keep on occurring, both Bhutanese people, Bhutanese institutions, and as a friendly country, India, both should be cognizant of that reality.
So India is cognizant of that reality. Also, India is watching very carefully. But like you say, institutional maturity is a work in progress in Bhutan. So with that, but along with that, we want to just wrap up this episode by reiterating that a very robust message has been given to China, and the disengagement process is on in many other areas now. Once the Pangong Lake disengagement is over, now the focus has shifted to other areas. So that's going on, and we are all watching the 10th round of talks that are taking place. So thank you very much. On this episode of the Ideas Factory, we shall be back with more discussion next week.
Thank you.